Welcome back to Main Street Living. I'm Cheryl Nelson here at the beautiful Sierra at Tahoe Ski Resort. And this is all part of the Operation Sierra Storm Weather Conference. And gosh, look at this behind me. This is so pretty. Blue skies, perfect powder. And we are interviewing some of the best meteorologists around the country. So joining me today, we have Scott Strenfel, and he is a meteorologist at PG&E. Now, for folks who don't know about PG&E and what that is, explain a little bit about it and welcome. So happy to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. What a beautiful day it is. And I love Sierra Tahoe, grew up skiing here, so it's awesome. But yeah, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, PG&E, is a investor-owned utility that serves Northern and Central California. And we have the privilege of serving 5 million meters, about 19 million Californians, clean energy every day.
Wow, so you guys do a lot. I know folks around the country can relate to this with the various utility companies providing power for them. Now, you gave an interesting quote during your presentation. Electric lines, they could wrap the earth 5 times, over 5 million trees. So what risks do these power lines pose to areas prone to wildfires?
Yeah, well, we have about 50,000 kilometers of lines that traverse high fire threat areas, and in those areas, there's about 5 million trees that are tall enough yet not far enough away that can impact our lines. And so it's important for us to monitor the weather conditions and the fuel conditions on the ground to be aware of what the risk is on a day-by-day basis and an hour-by-hour basis so we can make important decisions to mitigate that wildfire risk.
Yeah, absolutely, because I know all it takes is some strong winds to knock down the trees on power lines, and all you need is a spark to start one of these fires, which I know you are very well aware of. And you have a cool index, the PG&E Fire Probability Index. And what factors go into that? And explain that a little bit, and maybe folks around the country could use that as well.
Yeah, our FPI, the Fire Probability Index, was really started in 2015, and so we've been working on this for almost about a decade now. And we've rolled out recently the 5th version of the model. It's gotten better over time. And that's the whole goal of a scientist and a meteorologist, is to improve the models that you're using every day and season by season. And so really what goes into it is kind of the fire behavior triangle on steroids. So, you know, we want to get high resolution weather, wind, relative humidity, dew point depression. We've got the fuels on the surface, like what type of fuel is on the ground. Is it grass? Is it shrub? Is it trees? Is it forest? Is it urban? And then what, importantly, is the fuel moisture levels in that vegetation? How dry is the vegetation, and is it susceptible to sustaining a large fire? And then kind of the last component that goes into it is topography, because that's another important component of the triangle, which is the terrain flat? Is it sloped? Is it extremely rugged? Because that also plays into the suppression abilities of firefighting agencies, right? When it's very rugged terrain, it's just harder to fight the fire. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's a number of parameters that go into the model that determine what the fire probability is on an hour-by-hour basis across all of our electric lines so we can make informed decisions.
And you mentioned the terrain, which I know is a huge factor. Like in Southern California, we saw that recently with the Santa Ana winds. And gosh, the terrain down there has got to make it really hard to fight those fires. And so at what point does PG&E preemptively shut off power to customers? And how do customers react to this? Because I know a lot of people depend on power, especially if you need medical supplies and whatnot that need electricity.
Yeah, it's a tremendously difficult decision to make as a meteorologist, kind of in the room where we're making these decisions. But the factors that go into it, we've already touched on our fire probability index, right? So that gives us a sense of, you know, what is the risk on a fire probability standpoint every hour, every day. But what we also need to factor in is what is the probability of trees coming into our lines or equipment failing on our lines hour by hour as well. And so we have a artificial intelligence outage probability model that takes into account the projected wind speeds that we're going to see and then translates that into an outage probability. And when we get the combination of both those factors, we have high outage risk and high fire potential risk, then that's really the area that we're determining when and where we shut off power. And then, you know, we're not only using these AI models, but we're also utilizing some great stuff from external agencies, like is there a red flag warning, right? What is predictive services from the Forest Service saying? What are external agencies saying? What is the National Weather Service saying in terms of the event? So we can ensure that we're making the right decision at the right time. And then we use our network of weather stations when we're in event to make live decisions on, is this the right thing to do or not? Should we wait before we de-energize? And so it's quite involved, but those are some of the factors that we consider.
And are people usually pretty understanding when you have to turn off the power before there's a fire per se in their area?
Yeah, I will say public safety power shutoff, where we're proactively turning off the power, is challenging to customers. And I feel it on both sides, right? There's wildfire risks that we're seeing from a meteorology perspective, but we have friends, families, coworkers, neighbors that we're potentially impacting when we turn off the power, because utility workers are in the communities that we're serving, and so we hear about the challenges and we're seeing the challenges. For example, when we're taking out a school and that school's not able to open, right? And then what do the parents have to do, right? I'm a father myself, and I've been in a similar situation, and we just know how impactful it is when you have to throw away all the groceries that you may have just got from Costco, and we know how expensive that is. And so I think folks do get upset that their power's going off, and part of the reason why we're here today is just to explain why we have to take these measures to proactively shut off, so that there's maybe more understanding. And but there's more that we can do. We can wake up and get better every day, and that's just our goal is to get better at what we're doing and communicate better and model the forecast better, so we can shrink the size and scope of these events without taking on and leaving too much risk out there.
Yeah, and I think those are some of the lessons learned from previous fires. You learn every time there's a new event. As a meteorologist, I understand that. And going into the future, how will utility companies like PG&E better protect regions, clearing vegetation, moving power lines underground, and what else can homeowners do too?
Yeah, so we have a program where we're going to bury 10,000 line miles in our high fire threat district. And to put that in perspective, we have 25,000 line miles in the high fire threat district, and burying 10,000 is quite a goal that we have. But once the lines go underground, we no longer have to maintain and trim the vegetation back from the lines, right? So you get a little bit of benefit there, and it's and a cost savings there, because you don't have to revisit a location every year to trim vegetation. But there's also the benefit of better reliability, not just during fire weather events like public safety power shutoff or Diablo wind events or Santa Ana wind events, but also during winter storms that are tremendously impactful in Northern California. And we love our winter storms because that's what brings the snow here, but it's also impactful to communities. So the more lines that are underground, the more reliable the electric service will be. And then there's other tools that we have that we're deploying, like microgrids, and the future is looking quite exciting, actually. Being a utility meteorologist, it's neat.
As a Back to the Future geek, I would say let's hop in a time machine and see what all this looks like 100 years into the future. Maybe the power lines, a lot of them will be underground. Anything else homeowners should do before we go?
Yeah, homeowners, they definitely have a role to play. This is, one of the company stands that we have is that catastrophic wildfire shall stop. And there's a role that we all have to play to make that stand a reality. So there's a role that the utilities have, there's a role that states and local governments have, and then the individual has some tools to make their homes more resilient, clearing vegetation away from their dwelling and their infrastructure, and also clearing, maybe some of the pine needles that may accumulate on their roofs, and cleaning their gutters. So there's some measures that we all can take on this journey to help realize a stand.
Yeah, because you don't want anything for those embers to latch onto, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's what we're seeing more and more, is that fires are coming down out of the mountains, essentially, and we have communities that are, they love to live towards the mountains, and I totally get that, because I love hiking and mountain biking, and it's just beautiful. I mean, being in a community like this in winter is great, but in the summer, there's a wildfire risk here. In 2021, there was a massive wildfire that moved through this ski resort, which is incredible when you think about it. We're up at like 7,000 feet of elevation, but in summer, when it's dry enough, you could have some wildfire risk. And yeah, what we're seeing is that there's this ember cast that goes into structures, and it can embed itself in the structure or in vegetation near the structure to cause that structure to become on fire. And then these fires are kind of turning into, if the winds are strong enough, urban fires where they're spreading from house to house with that ember cast that happens. So, yeah, there's a role that all of us can play here.
Yeah, I think as a community, we all have to come together. I think we've seen it, as you mentioned, Sierra at Tahoe, definitely a resilient ski resort. Oh my gosh, you can see some of the trees here where the fire went through and where they are just standing now, just burnt to a crisp. But this place is doing well. It's amazing. Scott, thank you so much for joining us here today as part of the Operation Sierra Storm Weather Conference. I'm going to get out and hit the slopes and enjoy this beautiful day. All right, guys, we'll have more Main Street Living after this.